It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Tartan Collier. I and my wife Naomi have been coming here since our church closed back in the middle of June. It's a little daunting to think I'm going to follow Sally and I'm going to follow Amber and the amazing stories that we've heard about God's faithfulness and just how He provides. And particularly, Amber, I'm reminded of a saying that I heard many, many years ago, that the church is not a museum for saints, it's a hospital for sinners. And those people that are in hard circumstances are the ones that need God the most. So I am just, it's a testament to God's faithfulness that He carried you through that and brought you to people that could be His hands and feet. So thank you for sharing that. All right. When a couple of weeks ago, I was on the other side of the world. I was in Kenya. And I was talking to Luke last week, and he said, well, why don't you kind of share what it is that you were doing in Kenya and talk a little bit about how you saw God at work. And so I've got a story to tell, and I'm going to try to make it within the time commitment. I make it a little over, but hopefully not. And I wanted to just share with you this amazing church that we've been able to be involved with and have sponsored for several years with our previous church, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we get into this. But so this is my Kenya trip report, I guess. To start with, I wanted to make sure everybody knows where Kenya is, and I'll give you a little bit of kind of you are here. So Kenya is on the east side of the African continent. You see the big red arrow. As we zoom in, the place in Kenya that I was a place called Sondu, which the nearest biggest town is called Kisumu, and I'm sure none of you have ever even heard of that either. Nairobi, you might have heard about. That's the capital of Kenya, kind of in the middle there. But I had to take another plane out toward that big lake, Lake Victoria. It's the biggest lake in Africa. And Kisumu is right on the edge of that lake. Now, once I got there, I had to drive about an hour and a half south, or be driven an hour and a half south, to this little place called Sondu here. It really is very, very rural. And if that wasn't rural enough, from Sondu, I had to go into the sticks, and you can't really see very well. You might be able to see there's kind of a brown-green transition there, and that's like a cliff. That's like a hilltop on the left and a valley on the right. And the little zoom out shows 3 or so buildings on the right side of the road. That's actually the church and the pastor's house and so forth that I was able to go and visit for the first time in 5 years, I guess it is, or 4 years that we've been supporting them. Let me tell you a story about God's faithfulness. These two men, the one on the left is Pastor Daniel. The one in the middle is Pastor Kennedy. Kennedy Omundi is the person that we've gotten to know and love. He's an amazing, amazing guy. I'm going to tell you his story, a little bit of his story. So he grew up in a little town called Homa Bay. That's also on Lake Victoria. He was attending a kind of a bigger church that they had there. Prosperity Gospel is really, really big in Kenya, and so he was at a church and in kind of in a leadership role, and he was leading a Bible study at his house. And as they were digging into the Word, he's like, but this doesn't sound like what I hear on Sunday morning. There's a disconnect here. And so I'll flip over to the other side of the world now. We got an email on our church website that said, from somebody that said, I have questions about your doctrine statement. your statement of faith that you've got online. When we talked with our pastor about it, he's like, I've seen this before. They're just looking for an argument. This isn't really a serious thing. I'm going to invite them to go to coffee at Starbucks. So he sends an email back saying, hey, I'd be glad to discuss this. How about we meet at Starbucks on Rayford Road? And the response was, well, that will be a little hard because I am in Kenya. And what he had done is he had been looking at the internet, and he found a church website, and he said, I don't understand all of this stuff. I need to understand this. So he sent the email. Our pastor wound up spending several months of video calls. Once every week he would have like a 2-hour video call where they would go in depth on who is God, who is Jesus, what is faith. Just really digging into the details on this. And through that, we got to know a little bit of Kennedy's story. After he went to his church leadership and said, hey, I'm confused on all of this, they fired him. And so he said, well, but I still want to do this. So he was still having people come together at his house once a week, and they were doing an unauthorized Bible study, and the church reported him to the government, and he got sent to jail for 6 months. So when he got out, he needed sponsorship to even be able to continue in ministry. And that's where our church was able to sponsor him. He's actually a student at Grace School of Theology right now. He's taking distance learning and working on getting his certification that he will need to be an independent pastor. Anyway, so that's a lot of a long story about my friend Kennedy Omundi. And, he is an amazing man of God. He loves Jesus. He loves his people. And I was blessed to be able to have the opportunity to get together with him in the church. So let me kind of jump through a few more slides here. This is actually the church that's way up on the hill out in the sticks in Western Kenya. You see, there's a gate on the road. And once you go through the gate, you see the church building, which is on the upper right. The building on the lower left is actually his house. And on any given day, he may have 10 to 15 people in his house. They open their house to widows and orphans, and they'll feed them, and they'll give them a place to sleep. And I mean, it's crazy. It really is. And as I was mentioning, the lower right-hand corner there is a view off into the valley. Now, this church's name is Creekside Hilltop Bible Church. Think about that. Creekside Hilltop Bible Church. And the reason it's named that is because, well, number one, it's on a hilltop. And our church that wound up partnering with him was Creekside Bible Church. And so he said, well, I'm going to call my church Creekside Hilltop Bible Church. And so they named it that. And then he said, what's a creek? Language is hard sometimes. But anyway, Creekside Hilltop Bible Church is the official name for good or for ill. This is what the church looks like inside. And on a Sunday, there might be 100 people in this church and 70 or 80 kids out under a big pavilion tent outside. It is amazing. And unlike a lot of the churches in this area of Kenya, it is not a tribal church. So churches have denominations, so there's Pentecostal churches, there's a lot of Seventh-day Adventist churches, there's some more evangelical churches like Creekside Hilltop, but most of them are very tribal focused. So there's the Luo tribe, and there's some other tribes that are in the area, and oftentimes they just speak in their language. And so if they have a visitor that comes, the visitor doesn't understand the Luo language, so they can't participate in worship, and they're not really even welcome. But Creekside Hilltop is different because they've got different tribes that come, and they do some of their ministry they will do in Luo, and then they will translate it into Kiswahili. And it's a fascinating thing to see this preaching, to be a part of the preaching where it's preached in a language and it's translated into another language. since I was there, I found out a lot of them actually do speak some English. And so when I was there, instead of Luo and Kiswahili, they did English and Kiswahili. Because most people understand Kiswahili as kind of the national language, but then there's the tribal languages as well. And they will just mix it up. You know, it's like they'll be talking in English and the translator's over here translating into Kiswahili, and then something in Kiswahili, and it's translated into English, and it's really hard to follow sometimes, especially for somebody that's a visitor and doesn't get the accent, even when they're talking in English. It goes both ways though, because I was up there with a translator, and I started to preach at about 45 seconds into it. He's looking at me like, I don't get it. And then Kennedy gets up and he gently takes the microphone from me and says, I'll take it. Because he has worked with me enough that he understands what I'm saying. But it's a blast. When I got there, the very first day after I got there and was jet lagged and got to the hotel, which is another story. We'll talk about the hotel later. But the day after, they were having this big funeral for one of the pillars of the church, pillars of the community. This lady, Mama Alida, was well known. I mean, well known. And the first day that I was there, they said we're having the funeral and the burial service today. We've been doing it all week, but today is the actual burial service, so we want you to come. And I'm thinking, okay. And I get out there, and there's hundreds of people, and there's singing, and there's preaching, and I've got a front row seat because I'm the guest of honor, or one of the guests of honor at this funeral. And it was amazing to see. It really was. The faith and the celebration for a life well lived was, I don't have words to describe it. It's just incredible. This was on the next day. The next day was Sunday. So they had their Sunday worship service, which goes from about 9 in the morning till maybe 2:30 in the afternoon. So it's just the way it's done. And I mean, the worship is high energy, and the preaching is high energy. They have amplification when they've got electricity, which isn't all the time, but sometimes it cuts out in the middle of the service. But when they've got amplification, they're shouting into the microphone. They've got things turned up to 11. There's distortion. So that makes it even harder to understand. But man, it is lively worship. And this was after the service. These kids, I think there's 9 of them, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I think there's 9 of them up there. These are 9 of the 14 students that our church had the opportunity to sponsor to go to high school, because these kids in the rural area that they're at, they've got no ability to pay for high school at all. And, I think last year when we sponsored Naomi and I sponsored a couple of the kids, other people within our past church sponsored, one or more of the kids. It's like $800 for an entire year of school. And for us, that's still $800, but it's not, doesn't feel like it's that much. For them, it's everything. Because if they can't go to high school, they're, working in the market and, maybe getting taken advantage of. It's transformational for these kids to be able to go to school. And so when they found out I was going to be there, about, like I said, 3/4 of them, 2/3 of them came to the church, even though it was a long way away from the school. They came on that Sunday because they wanted to say hello to me and get a picture with me and everything. And man, I was blessed beyond belief to have that opportunity. Everything that's done in Kenya, pretty much everything, is accompanied with food. And so it's good that we had communion this morning. I mean, we take communion. Communion's kind of, we have a way of doing communion here. This is how they do communion there. It's a meal, and they're cooking over a wood fire outside, and they bring the food in, they set it on the table, And when you've got a guest there, they pull out all the stops. They go all out. But this is pastor, a couple of the associate pastors, and actually I think a couple of them pastor different churches in the area. So they all know each other. They're all connected. But you got to realize that if a church is 3 kilometers away, you can't just hop in your car and drive to it. You can't just jump on a motorcycle, because most people don't have that. So these churches are in the various communities where people can walk to them. And that to me was another aha, kind of surprise to me, is how much of a network they are, and how they encourage and support one another, and how they come together when they can. Like my visit was an opportunity for them to come together and celebrate. So, all right, let me keep going because we're going to run out of time. I mentioned our church closed. And when our church closed, we had the opportunity to take things we were like selling things and so forth. And we said, wait a minute, we've got all this stuff from our children's program. Tartan, can you take that to Kenya? And I'm like, maybe. Let me see if I can get it through the airport and all that kind of stuff. But I was able to take a load of stuff over there that was an amazing blessing to them, because they get shirts and backpacks and toys and things like that. And the thing in the upper right-hand corner that you're seeing there that you're going, what in the world is that? That's a water filter that we used in our church building, which we didn't have the best water. So we would use that to make coffee and tea and stuff like that. And it's like, they could really use something that could help them get clean water. And so I was able to take it there. It actually worked when I got it there. And it's like, praise God. That's awesome. So they have clean water to drink now. I mentioned Pastor Daniel in that first picture from where they picked me up at the airport. So this is his little church. He's got he's really out in the. I mean, I think Creekside Hilltop is rural. This is rural squared. He's in a very, very poor area. They've got a piece of rented land that they built a temporary structure on. They don't have any amplification, no keyboard for worship or anything like that. But they've got some amazing people that love the Lord. And this was, they all showed it. This is a bunch of the elders from that church that showed up to say hello to me. And there's their little building. It's just out there in the field. The family of the woman that had passed away, her son, Titus, is the guy in the blue shirt that you see standing next to me. He's one of the pastors that you've seen on previous slides. And the death of his mother really, really challenged him. He shared his testimony about how it caused him to kind of spiral into, what am I going to do without my mother, and where is God and all of this. And he said it just really kind of was a dark time for him, until God kind of shone a light through, and he said, you need to talk to Kennedy. Reach out, talk to Kennedy, and he will encourage you. And he did. Kennedy said, God has used your mother amazingly in her life, and now, with your mother's death, he's getting even more glory. And all these people are hearing about what a faithful servant of God she was. And we went to their house middle of the week or so, and oh, by the way, Tartan, you need to preach and encourage them. And this was not a one-off. I had multiple times where it's like, Tartan, will you preach? Tartan, will you teach? Tartan, will you do this? Or, and I'm just, God, I'm just rolling with the flow here. You work through me to do what you want to do. And so that's what I did. But this was our get together with their family, and it was a wonderful time to get together and just encourage them that God has things that He is doing, including the little baby that's on the other side. So Titus is on one side, his wife is on the other side, and their little baby Kennedy. They like to name after pastors and things like that. So this little baby was in the hospital when I got to Kenya. They thought it was malaria, and then the doctors were like, no, he must have eaten some poison because he's got blood poison going on. Oh, no, it's something else. And they kept, every day it was something more dire that this child is about, he's on the brink of death. And so we went to the hospital, and, we showed up. We prayed for him. Part of it was like, don't panic like the doctors are. Just trust. God's got this. And by the end of the week, he's there with his mom, not in the hospital and recovering. So, they really, it's like anytime someone's sick, what is it in James? Is anyone sick? You should pray. Get the elders to come pray, and they do. And God does things. It's wonderful to see. Okay, almost done. I talked about the experience of working with a translator and everything. That was amazing. This was I told you. Oh, Tartan, we want you to teach. Okay, so tomorrow's Saturday. We want you to teach however God feels led. Just teach. Oh, and by the way, we're going to have pastors and elders from like 6 different churches here. And so this was afterwards. We're hanging out with the pastors and talking with them. But it was wonderful. I had the opportunity to it's like, well, what am I even going to teach them? These are pastors. What am I going to teach them? Oh, I know what I'm going to teach them. I had done I had led a Bible study at work before I retired, and it's like in going through that Bible study, it was a study of the book of Mark, and I found out through that Bible study for myself, Mark is an absolutely amazing book. And it's not because of the content. Everything you find in Mark, pretty much everything you find in Mark is either in Matthew or it's in Luke. There's nothing new in Mark. But when you look at the structure of Mark, that's the amazing thing. That's a sermon for a different day. But I was able to share that with these pastors and just encourage them, that this gospel is, don't overlook it. That's something you need. And God just put that on my heart, like the day before, I guess. This is what you're going to share, Tartan. And just, again, roll with the flow. This is the children's program. So, and this was not Sunday. This was the day before. This was Saturday. They brought them all together because that was the official giving of the stuff that had been brought, sort of a day. And when I look at that and I think about, I'm sure that that's not all the kids that are there, but that's probably, 60 kids? That's amazing. And they feed them every single week. Costs about $100 to feed all of those kids with just a meal. I don't know if it's the only meal that they may get on that day, but a lot of these kids are orphans, and the church just loves them, and they come from all around. And then this is the worship service that I was saying. Just I wish I could show the video of this, but I just took a still photo from one of the videos and said, you don't get a good sense from the picture, but this is crazy worship. It's just the amount of energy is off the charts, and I was probably the most reserved person there, and I was trying to get into it myself. So anyway, that's my what did I do with my September vacation? What did I do with going to Kenya? It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and they were already trying to convince me. Okay, so when are you coming back, Tartan? When are you coming back? And it's like, I really would like to go back, and I would like to bring people with me, and I'd just like to share the great stuff that's going on here. So With that, I'm going to pray, since I think we're about out of time, right? I'm going to go ahead and pray for us. And after the service, if you're interested in seeing a little bit more, I've got a couple of these little brochures that they printed up and they gave to me just before I left for the plane. And it talks about what's going on there and just gives you a little bit of background. So I will put this back on those tables at the back. So if you wanted to stop by and just kind of scan through it, if you're interested, or talk to me or talk to Naomi,